Tonight, we're covering the life and legacy of the legendary military leader and emperor, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon was an ambitious, strategic, and transformative figure who skillfully commanded armies, reshaped nations, and influenced history in ways that continue to fascinate people today. So, before we all get nice and comfortable, take a moment, if you haven't already, to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let us know the time and location from which you are watching. Now, let's get right into our fascinating story, and we hope it helps you learn while you sleep. Napoleon Bonaparte was born on August 15, 1769, in the modest Corsican town of Ajaccio. This Mediterranean island had recently come under French rule, a political shift that profoundly shaped Napoleon's childhood and future identity. Born into a family of minor nobility, Napoleon was one of 8 surviving children born to Carlo Bonaparte, a lawyer of modest means, and his spirited wife, Letizia Ramolino. Their home was humble yet dignified, instilling in young Napoleon a sense of pride, ambition, and determination that would become hallmarks of his character. As a child, Napoleon was intensely curious, showing remarkable intellectual promise early on. He spent countless hours reading books on history, philosophy, and military strategy, absorbing knowledge far beyond his years. Yet his childhood was far from idyllic. He was a reserved, somewhat solitary boy, often preferring his books and his vivid imagination to the rough play of other children. At the age of 9, Napoleon faced a significant turning point. His father secured him a scholarship to a prestigious French military academy at Brienne-le-Château. Leaving behind his native Corsica, Napoleon traveled to mainland France, a foreign land where he initially struggled with isolation, ridicule, and a profound sense of displacement. His heavy Corsican accent, shorter stature, and reserved nature made him an easy target for bullying by wealthier French classmates, fueling his determination to excel and prove his worth. Despite these challenges, Napoleon quickly demonstrated exceptional talent and intellect. At the academy, he studied mathematics, history, geography, and languages with remarkable discipline. His aptitude for strategy and leadership became clear when he eagerly engaged in war games and mock battles, demonstrating boldness and creativity that frequently impressed instructors, even those initially skeptical of the young Corsican outsider. In 1784, at age 15, Napoleon entered the École Militaire in Paris, an elite institution preparing students for higher military command. There, he further honed his strategic mind and leadership qualities. Yet even amid academic success, he remained fiercely attached to his Corsican heritage, passionately involved in the nationalist aspirations of his homeland. Napoleon dreamed of Corsica's independence, envisioning himself as a hero leading the island toward liberation and greatness. However, these dreams soon collided harshly with reality. The sudden death of his father, Carlo, plunged the Bonaparte family into financial hardship. Napoleon, at just 16, now carried enormous responsibilities. His family's survival depended largely upon his success and ambition. The young man who had already learned self-reliance under difficult circumstances now fully grasped the urgency of achieving distinction and financial stability. At 16, Napoleon graduated early from the École Militaire, ranking impressively among his classmates. He became a second lieutenant in the artillery, a respected but relatively obscure position. Still, Napoleon's formidable will and boundless ambition had already ignited, setting him apart from his peers. Even as a low-ranking officer, he read extensively, studied tactics obsessively, and dreamed of greatness, patiently awaiting opportunities to distinguish himself. These formative years, marked by struggle, determination, isolation, and fierce ambition, shaped Napoleon profoundly. Corsica had taught him pride, France taught him resilience. His rigorous military training provided him with the discipline, strategic thinking, and leadership skills that would soon enable him to rise swiftly through turbulent revolutionary times. Unknown to Napoleon at this early stage, the storm clouds of revolution were gathering in France, setting the stage for upheaval, and offering precisely the opportunities he needed to ascend from obscurity to unprecedented power. In 1789, As France erupted into revolution, Napoleon Bonaparte was a young officer serving quietly in the artillery, stationed far from the initial upheaval. Yet he followed events intently, sensing a dramatic shift in history and opportunity. France had plunged into chaos. The monarchy crumbled, radical new ideas spread rapidly, and the political landscape transformed almost overnight. Amid this turmoil, Napoleon recognized the possibility for rapid advancement, if only he could seize his moment. Returning briefly to Corsica in 1792, Napoleon hoped to support his homeland's nationalist ambitions. However, ideological conflicts erupted violently, causing tensions that forced Napoleon and his family to flee back to mainland France. Disillusioned yet determined, he abandoned Corsican nationalism and committed himself wholeheartedly to the French revolutionary cause. Napoleon understood that his future lay not in Corsican independence, but in embracing France's revolutionary fervor and leveraging it to fulfill his own ambitions. His first significant opportunity came in 1793 during the Siege of Toulon, a critical conflict where royalist forces, supported by British naval power, threatened the revolutionary government's authority. Napoleon, serving as an artillery captain, quickly grasped the strategic weaknesses of the enemy positions. Displaying extraordinary insight and tactical innovation, he devised a daring plan to seize critical high ground dominating the harbor. Despite skepticism from his superiors, Napoleon's audacity and precision soon won out. Leading personally under heavy fire, he rallied his troops, captured key positions, and enabled French artillery to bombard the British fleet effectively. Within weeks, Toulon fell to revolutionary forces. This spectacular success immediately thrust Napoleon into prominence. At just 24 years old, he was promoted rapidly, earning recognition from revolutionary leaders in Paris who noted his strategic brilliance. In the wake of Toulon, Napoleon's confidence grew enormously. He became closely aligned with influential revolutionary politicians, including Maximilien Robespierre's younger brother, Augustin. Yet Napoleon was careful to avoid being drawn deeply into political intrigues, choosing instead to focus on military strategy and leadership. This careful balance proved wise when Robespierre fell from power in 1794, triggering a violent backlash against many associated with his regime. Napoleon, though briefly arrested, was quickly released, his military achievements overshadowing political suspicions. Still, Napoleon's career stalled temporarily during this chaotic period known as the Thermidorian reaction. Ambitious but temporarily sidelined, he turned inward, reflecting intensely on military strategy, history, and leadership. He spent hours each day studying campaigns of past generals, meticulously analyzing tactics, logistics, and command decisions. Napoleon understood instinctively that preparation, intellect, and vision, not merely ambition, were critical for true greatness. In October 1795, opportunity struck again. Royalist insurgents launched an armed revolt against the newly formed revolutionary government, the Directory. Desperate and short of competent commanders, the Directory turned to Napoleon, entrusting him with defending Paris itself. Seizing the moment decisively, Napoleon ordered artillery to be positioned strategically throughout the city. When Royalist rebels advanced, Napoleon's cannons unleashed devastating grapeshot, swiftly crushing the insurgency. This ruthless yet effective action earned Napoleon immense gratitude from the Directory, securing his position firmly within revolutionary leadership circles. Almost overnight, Napoleon became one of France's most celebrated military heroes. Promoted swiftly, he now commanded respect, influence, and loyalty among his troops and fellow revolutionaries. Yet beneath his disciplined exterior, Napoleon's ambition remained insatiable. He knew that political and military success could vanish as swiftly as it arrived. Determined to consolidate his newfound power, Napoleon focused intently on building his reputation, cultivating powerful connections, and planning meticulously for the future. Little did France, or the world, realize that this young, ambitious officer was only just beginning his astonishing rise. The stage was set for Napoleon Bonaparte to step boldly into history, forever reshaping Europe and altering the course of nations. In March 1796, at just 26 years old, Napoleon Bonaparte received the command that would transform his life. The Directory, recognizing his military genius and decisive actions, appointed him commander of the French army in Italy. This appointment surprised many senior officers, who viewed Napoleon as young and untested for such a significant responsibility. Yet Napoleon, confident and eager, embraced this extraordinary chance, determined to prove himself on the battlefield. Upon arriving in Italy, Napoleon found his troops demoralized, poorly equipped, and outnumbered by Austrian and Piedmontese forces. With characteristic boldness, he immediately set about restoring their morale. In his first address to his soldiers, he declared passionately, "Soldiers, you are poorly fed and nearly naked. I shall lead you into the most fertile plains of the world. Rich provinces and great cities will fall into your power, and there you will find honor, glory, and wealth." His electrifying speech ignited the army's spirit, setting the stage for a campaign marked by remarkable victories. Napoleon quickly implemented sweeping reforms, improving discipline, logistics, and tactics. He trained tirelessly alongside his men, personally leading by example. Napoleon's dynamic leadership rapidly turned a weary, defeated army into an efficient, disciplined fighting force ready to conquer. Napoleon wasted no time launching aggressive offensives against enemy positions. His strategy was bold, innovative, and ruthlessly efficient. Rather than facing enemy forces head-on, Napoleon brilliantly divided and outmaneuvered larger Austrian armies, isolating and defeating them piece by piece. His victories at Montenotte and Lodi stunned Europe, showcasing Napoleon's daring tactics and relentless determination. At Lodi, his personal courage under heavy fire further endeared him to his men, who began referring to him affectionately as the Little Corporal. These initial victories secured vast regions of northern Italy, delivering riches, supplies, and vital strategic positions to the French army. The success boosted morale, inspired loyalty, and won admiration across France. Napoleon, demonstrating exceptional political acumen, capitalized on these victories to establish himself as a popular hero back home. He carefully crafted dispatches highlighting his triumphs, personally managing his public image to ensure maximum political impact in Paris. Yet Napoleon's ambitions went far beyond immediate battlefield success. In Italy, he revealed a broader vision of conquest and cultural transformation. As he advanced, he systematically reorganized captured territories, establishing new republican governments aligned with revolutionary ideals. Napoleon introduced reforms aimed at dismantling outdated feudal structures, modernizing administration, and spreading Enlightenment values, actions he saw as vital to securing lasting influence over conquered territories. As the campaign continued, Napoleon's army marched swiftly across Italy, winning stunning victories at Rivoli, Arcole, and Castiglione. Each success solidified Napoleon's reputation as an invincible commander whose strategic brilliance seemed unmatched. By early 1797, his forces stood triumphantly at the gates of Vienna, forcing the Austrians to seek peace negotiations. Napoleon personally conducted the Treaty of Campo Formio, a diplomatic triumph marking the end of hostilities with Austria. France gained extensive territories, and Napoleon's fame soared dramatically. Yet beyond military conquest, he seized priceless artwork, treasures, and artifacts from Italy, sending them back to Paris to showcase French superiority. These cultural spoils enhanced his prestige and endeared him further to French citizens, solidifying his position as both conqueror and patron of the arts. Returning briefly to Paris after his dazzling Italian campaign, Napoleon was greeted as a national hero. Parades celebrated his name, newspapers praised his genius, and revolutionary leaders cautiously eyed his growing popularity. Napoleon, however, remained keenly aware that fame was fleeting and power fragile. Even amid celebration, his ambition drove him to plan his next bold move. France, and indeed all of Europe, began to sense that this young, daring general was destined for far greater power and glory yet to come. By 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte had become France's most celebrated military hero. His Italian campaign had cemented his reputation, but he was restless, driven by ambition and the need for new victories. France remained at odds with Great Britain, its most formidable rival. Recognizing the difficulty of a direct invasion, Napoleon devised a daring alternative: strike British power indirectly by seizing control of Egypt, disrupting trade routes to British colonies in India and establishing French dominance in the Mediterranean. In May 1798, Napoleon set sail from Toulon with a massive expeditionary force of over 35,000 soldiers and sailors, accompanied by hundreds of scholars, scientists, artists, and engineers. The ambitious enterprise was not merely military. Napoleon intended this expedition to be a cultural and scientific conquest, projecting French Enlightenment ideals across distant lands. Despite the grandeur of his vision, the expedition faced immediate challenges, including rough seas, disease, and the looming presence of the powerful British Navy. Arriving in Egypt, Napoleon swiftly captured Alexandria, setting the stage for an ambitious march inland toward Cairo. On July 21st, near the village of Ambient, Napoleon confronted Mamluk forces in the famous Battle of the Pyramids. With superior tactics and disciplined formations, Napoleon's army overwhelmed their opponents, securing a decisive victory. Cairo fell, and Napoleon confidently proclaimed to his soldiers, "40 centuries look down upon you," linking their victory with historical grandeur. Yet, Napoleon's triumph was short-lived. Days later, British Admiral Horatio Nelson inflicted a catastrophic blow to the French fleet at the Battle of the Nile, destroying Napoleon's ships and effectively trapping the French forces in Egypt. Cut off from reinforcements and supplies, Napoleon's grand expedition was suddenly transformed into a struggle for survival. Still, Napoleon remained undaunted. Despite logistical challenges, he quickly began implementing ambitious reforms within Egypt, aiming to modernize its administration, economy, and infrastructure. Napoleon's scholars documented Egypt's history, culture, and geography meticulously, resulting in groundbreaking discoveries like the Rosetta Stone, later instrumental in deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphs. His visionary approach transformed the Egyptian campaign into a pivotal cultural and scientific milestone, even amidst military setbacks. However, Napoleon's progressive agenda clashed dramatically with local customs, religion, and politics. His attempts to reshape Egyptian society led to resentment and fierce resistance. In 1799, uprisings erupted, challenging French authority. Napoleon responded decisively, suppressing rebellions harshly yet failing to secure lasting stability. Frustrated and isolated, he saw his dream of Eastern Empire crumbling. News from France soon shifted Napoleon's priorities dramatically. Reports indicated the revolutionary government in Paris, the Directory, was weakening rapidly, mired in corruption, inefficiency, and internal conflict. Sensing opportunity, Napoleon made a fateful decision. Quietly and quickly, he left his army in Egypt, embarking secretly for France aboard a small vessel. This controversial decision shocked many of his troops, who felt abandoned by their charismatic leader. Napoleon landed in France in October 1799, greeted with cautious enthusiasm. Though criticized for leaving his men behind, his reputation and charisma remained intact, positioning him perfectly to capitalize on France's political instability. He swiftly assessed the situation, concluding that conditions were ideal for decisive action to seize political power. Within weeks, Napoleon orchestrated a bold political coup, known historically as the coup of 18 Brumaire, overthrowing the Directory. Declaring himself first consul, Napoleon effectively took control of the French government, promising order, stability, and national unity after years of revolutionary chaos. At just 30 years old, Napoleon now held supreme political power, setting the stage for a remarkable era of French history. The ambitious Corsican boy who once dreamed of greatness had become the most powerful leader in France, prepared to reshape Europe itself according to his vision. With the successful coup of 18 Brumaire in November 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte seized political control of France as first consul. At just 30 years old, he held supreme authority. But he understood clearly that seizing power was one thing, maintaining it, quite another. France was weary from years of political instability, violence, and uncertainty. Napoleon realized that his immediate challenge was to stabilize the country, restore public confidence, and secure his rule. Napoleon moved decisively. He swiftly implemented reforms aimed at modernizing France's legal, economic, and administrative systems. One of his most enduring achievements during this period was the creation of the Civil Code, later known as the Napoleonic Code. This legal reform simplified France's complex legal system, establishing clear, uniform laws governing property rights, contracts, and civil liberties. The code emphasized equality before the law, religious toleration, and the secularization of governance, principles that became fundamental to modern European law. Under Napoleon's leadership, France underwent an astonishing administrative transformation. He centralized government authority, creating a professional bureaucracy staffed by skilled officials chosen based on merit, not privilege or birthright. The old feudal structures were dismantled permanently, replaced by a rational, efficient system emphasizing ability and accomplishment. His reforms reached deeply into society, establishing new public schools and universities aimed at educating future leaders loyal to his government. Economically, Napoleon stabilized France through rigorous financial management. He founded the Bank of France to restore confidence in the nation's finances, implemented effective taxation systems, and stabilized currency. Infrastructure projects flourished. Roads, canals, ports, and public buildings constructed under Napoleon's direction improved commerce, unified the nation, and created jobs, further enhancing his popularity. Religion was another critical area where Napoleon's pragmatic leadership proved effective. After years of revolutionary hostility toward religion, he understood that restoring harmony between France and the Catholic Church was politically advantageous. In 1801, Napoleon signed the Concordat with Pope Pius VII, re-establishing formal relations between France and the Vatican. The agreement allowed religious freedom for citizens and reinstated Catholicism's influential role in society, though Napoleon maintained firm state control over church affairs. This compromise healed divisions, satisfied the population, and stabilized France politically. Yet, even as Napoleon's domestic reforms strengthened France, he remained acutely aware of ongoing international threats. His consolidation of power alarmed Europe's monarchies, particularly Britain, Austria, and Russia, all viewing Napoleon's France as dangerously revolutionary and expansionist. Conflict seemed inevitable, but Napoleon, ever strategic, chose diplomacy initially, buying time to strengthen France further. In 1802, the Treaty of Amiens brought temporary peace between France and Great Britain, briefly pausing hostilities. Napoleon used this respite effectively, further consolidating his domestic power and popularity. His achievements earned him immense admiration from the French people, who saw in him not only a powerful leader but also a visionary capable of restoring their nation's honor, stability, and prosperity. Yet Napoleon's ambitions extended beyond peaceful reform and domestic prosperity. He recognized that lasting glory, and his legacy, depended upon military victory and expansion. In 1804, confident in his strength and popularity, Napoleon crowned himself Emperor of the French in an elaborate ceremony held in Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. By placing the imperial crown upon his own head, he symbolically declared that his authority derived not from divine right or tradition, but from his own achievements, merit, and ambition. This coronation marked a critical turning point in Napoleon's career. France, once fiercely republican, now embraced imperial grandeur and centralized power under Napoleon's control. Yet even as he solidified his rule, Napoleon sensed clearly that his greatest challenges lay ahead, as the powers of Europe mobilized against him. With France unified, prosperous, and strengthened under his leadership, Napoleon prepared once again for conflict, driven relentlessly by ambition and destiny to reshape Europe itself. By 1805, Napoleon Bonaparte stood at the height of his power. Crowned Emperor of the French, he controlled a prosperous nation unified under his centralized government. Yet Europe's great monarchies, Britain, Austria, and Russia, remained fiercely opposed to Napoleon's growing influence, viewing him as an existential threat. Determined to challenge his dominance, they formed the Third Coalition, intent on halting France's expansion and dismantling Napoleon's empire. Recognizing the imminent conflict, Napoleon acted swiftly, marshalling his armies and preparing meticulously for war. A master of organization, he crafted an army unlike anything Europe had seen before. Known as the Grande Armée, it was composed of disciplined, battle-hardened soldiers passionately loyal to their charismatic emperor. Equipped with superior weapons, rapid mobility, and unmatched strategic leadership, the French forces became an unprecedented military force. In August 1805, Napoleon boldly marched his armies eastward, aiming to defeat Austria before Russian reinforcements could arrive. Displaying stunning speed and strategic brilliance, he rapidly encircled and defeated Austrian forces at Ulm, capturing thousands of prisoners. Vienna fell soon after, further boosting French morale and Napoleon's confidence. Yet Napoleon understood clearly that the ultimate showdown was still ahead, a direct confrontation with combined Austrian and Russian armies gathering strength in the east. This decisive battle took place near the small village of Austerlitz, in modern-day Czechia. Known later as the Battle of Austerlitz, or the Battle of the Three Emperors, it became one of history's greatest military engagements. Facing numerically superior Austrian and Russian forces commanded personally by Tsar Alexander I and Holy Roman Emperor Francis II, Napoleon chose the battlefield carefully, confident in his ability to exploit enemy weaknesses. On December 2, 1805, under dense morning fog, the combined Austro-Russian army launched their attack. Yet this aggressive advance was precisely what Napoleon had anticipated. With remarkable foresight, he deliberately weakened his right flank, inviting enemy assault. As his opponents advanced, believing victory certain, Napoleon executed his masterstroke. At precisely the right moment, he ordered his elite troops concealed behind hills to strike the enemy center decisively. Emerging swiftly through the mist, French soldiers stunned the Austro-Russian forces, splitting their lines in half. Chaos erupted within enemy ranks as Napoleon's maneuver unfolded perfectly. Within hours, the Allied forces collapsed, sustaining devastating casualties and complete disarray. Napoleon's brilliant tactical genius and disciplined army had secured an overwhelming victory. Austerlitz became Napoleon's greatest triumph, symbolizing his unparalleled military skill and strategic brilliance. In a single day, he had decisively crushed Europe's most formidable armies, confirming France's dominance and his own legend as a military genius. The battle forced Austria into immediate negotiations, resulting in the Treaty of Prespot, which significantly expanded Napoleon's influence and reshaped Europe's political map. Returning to Paris, Napoleon received a hero's welcome, his status elevated to near mythical proportions. Across France, citizens celebrated their emperor's incredible victory, convinced of his invincibility and visionary leadership. Artists, poets, and writers immortalized Austerlitz, reinforcing Napoleon's cult of personality. His popularity soared, reinforcing his imperial authority and solidifying loyalty from citizens and soldiers alike. Yet, beneath the triumph and celebration, Napoleon himself remained soberly realistic. He understood that the immense scale of his victories would only intensify opposition from powerful rivals, especially Great Britain, which still stood defiantly against him. Austerlitz had confirmed his military supremacy, but Napoleon sensed clearly that maintaining his vast empire required constant vigilance, strategic brilliance, and continued victory. Determined and confident, Napoleon prepared for further challenges. Having proven himself unmatched on the battlefield, he set his sights even higher, envisioning a Europe united under French rule. Yet even as he planned future conquests, unseen dangers loomed, rivalries, resentments, and resistance that would ultimately test Napoleon's ambition like never before. Following his remarkable victory at Austerlitz, Napoleon Bonaparte reached the zenith of his power. Europe lay largely subdued under French influence, with kingdoms and principalities either allied, conquered, or intimidated into neutrality. By 1806, Napoleon controlled much of Western and Central Europe, directly or indirectly ruling territories stretching from the Atlantic Ocean deep into Eastern Europe. Yet, his insatiable ambition drove him further, as he envisioned an empire capable of reshaping the entire European continent. In 1806, Napoleon boldly reorganized the territories under his influence, dissolving the ancient Holy Roman Empire, a political entity that had existed for nearly 1,000 years. In its place, he established the Confederation of the Rhine, a federation of German states loyal to France. This strategic move solidified French control over Central Europe, further isolating Austria and Prussia, who watched warily as Napoleon's dominance grew ever stronger. Feeling threatened, Prussia declared war against France later that year. Napoleon swiftly responded, launching a rapid and decisive campaign that culminated in the twin victories of Jena and Auerstedt. Prussian forces, once revered for military discipline, were utterly defeated. Napoleon marched triumphantly into Berlin, humiliating the Prussian monarchy and imposing harsh peace terms. Europe marveled again at Napoleon's speed, decisiveness, and ruthless efficiency. Yet, as his empire expanded, Napoleon faced persistent opposition from Great Britain. Unable to defeat Britain's powerful navy directly, Napoleon attempted economic warfare through his continental system, an ambitious blockade designed to isolate Britain economically by preventing European nations from trading with the British Isles. Though innovative, this strategy proved deeply problematic. Many European nations depended heavily upon British trade, and the blockade disrupted economies and caused widespread resentment against French domination. The continental system also inadvertently triggered Napoleon's disastrous invasion of the Iberian Peninsula. In 1808, frustrated by Portugal's refusal to comply fully with the blockade, Napoleon sent troops to occupy Portugal and neighboring Spain. This decision became a critical misstep. Spanish citizens rose fiercely against French occupation, initiating the brutal and prolonged Peninsular War. Guerrilla fighters, aided by British troops under the Duke of Wellington, inflicted heavy losses, draining French resources and morale significantly. Amid escalating troubles abroad, Napoleon grappled with personal matters as well. Seeking a stable dynasty, he divorced his beloved first wife, Josephine, who had failed to provide an heir. In 1810, Napoleon married the young Austrian Archduchess Marie-Louise, forging a politically significant alliance intended to secure his empire's legitimacy. In 1811, Marie-Louise gave birth to a son, Napoleon II, finally providing the emperor with an heir and reinforcing his sense of imperial destiny. Yet beneath these triumphs, Napoleon's empire was showing signs of strain. Overextension, constant warfare, economic difficulties, and growing resentment across occupied territories hinted at deeper vulnerabilities. Napoleon himself grew increasingly isolated and restless, determined to secure his legacy through further military success. In 1812, driven by ambition and frustrated by Russia's refusal to honor the continental system, Napoleon launched his most audacious campaign yet, a massive invasion of Russia. Leading the largest army Europe had ever seen, nearly 500,000 soldiers, Napoleon confidently anticipated swift victory. Yet the Russian campaign quickly transformed into disaster. Russian forces avoided direct battle, employing scorched earth tactics, burning crops and cities to deny Napoleon's troops supplies and shelter. As the Grande Armée advanced deeper into Russian territory, Napoleon faced unimaginable hardships: hunger, exhaustion, disease, and a brutal Russian winter. The campaign culminated in the bloody Battle of Borodino near Moscow, one of history's most devastating battles. Though Napoleon claimed victory, it was costly and inconclusive. He marched into Moscow expecting surrender, only to find the city abandoned and engulfed in flames, burned deliberately by retreating Russians. Trapped deep within enemy territory, with winter approaching, Napoleon realized grimly the immense scale of his miscalculation. His empire, once seemingly invincible, now teetered precariously at the brink of disaster. In the autumn of 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte faced the gravest crisis of his remarkable career. Having occupied Moscow in September, he discovered that victory had become meaningless. The Russian capital was deserted, stripped of supplies, and consumed by fires deliberately set by retreating Russians. Napoleon, who had always relied on swift, decisive battles, found himself trapped in a devastating situation. Winter approached rapidly, his army was dangerously exposed, and Russian surrender seemed increasingly unlikely. After weeks of indecision, Napoleon realized his army could not survive the brutal Russian winter in Moscow. In October, he ordered the Grande Armée to retreat westward, a journey of nearly 1,000 miles through frozen, hostile territory. The retreat quickly turned into a nightmare. Bitterly cold weather, starvation, and constant harassment from Russian forces destroyed morale and cohesion. Soldiers struggled desperately, abandoning weapons and equipment, collapsing from exhaustion, and succumbing to hypothermia. As the retreat dragged on, the once glorious Grande Armée disintegrated into chaos. Discipline broke down, and the harsh conditions left thousands dead or dying. By December, when the remnants finally reached the border, fewer than 40,000 soldiers remained from the original 500,000 who had proudly marched into Russia months earlier. Napoleon's grand ambitions had led to one of history's most catastrophic military disasters. Returning hastily to Paris, Napoleon faced dire news. His catastrophic defeat in Russia had galvanized Europe's opposition, encouraging previously subdued nations to rise against French rule. Prussia quickly joined Russia in forming a powerful coalition against Napoleon, and soon Britain, Austria, Sweden, and other nations united against him. Europe was determined to end Napoleon's dominance once and for all. Yet even in defeat, Napoleon's resilience and military genius remained formidable. He rapidly raised new armies, rallying French citizens with passionate appeals to patriotism and sacrifice. In 1813, Napoleon returned to battle, fiercely determined to reclaim his supremacy. At Lutzen and Botzen, he managed victories that temporarily restored French morale and confidence. However, the overwhelming numerical superiority of his enemies eventually wore him down. In October 1813, at the epic Battle of Leipzig, known as the Battle of Nations, Napoleon faced a massive coalition army comprising Russian, Prussian, Austrian, and Swedish forces. In the largest battle Europe had ever seen, lasting 4 brutal days, Napoleon's forces were decisively defeated. His army, exhausted and outnumbered, was forced into another bitter retreat toward France. The defeat at Leipzig spelled the beginning of the end for Napoleon's empire. Enemy forces pressed relentlessly into France, invading French soil itself. Napoleon fought brilliantly in desperate, defensive battles, showcasing tactical genius even as his situation became increasingly hopeless. Yet his earlier charisma and invincibility had diminished significantly, and many French people, weary of constant war and hardship, began questioning their once beloved emperor. In March 1814, Allied armies entered Paris. Realizing further resistance was futile, Napoleon reluctantly abdicated the throne on April 6, 1814. He was granted exile on the small Mediterranean island of Elba, allowed to retain the honorary title, Emperor, but stripped of genuine power. As he left France, Napoleon reflected bitterly on the empire he had lost, the culmination of decades of ambition, brilliance, and struggle reduced to exile and humiliation. Yet, even in defeat, Napoleon's restless spirit refused to surrender completely. From exile in Elba, he observed closely as France struggled under a restored monarchy. Secretly, Napoleon planned a bold return, believing the French people still yearned for his leadership. In March 1815, seizing a daring opportunity, he escaped Elba, landing in France once more. Against all odds, Napoleon marched triumphantly toward Paris. Troops sent to arrest him instead rallied enthusiastically behind him, demonstrating his enduring charisma. Within weeks, Napoleon reclaimed power in a breathtaking revival known historically as the 100 Days. Yet Napoleon himself knew clearly, his return meant Europe would soon mobilize once again, this time determined, more fiercely than ever, to defeat him for good. Napoleon Bonaparte's return from exile on Elba stunned Europe and galvanized his enemies. Though he swiftly reclaimed power during the dramatic period known as the 100 Days, Napoleon understood that war was inevitable. Determined to defeat him once and for all, the Allied powers, Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia, quickly formed a massive coalition, vowing never again to underestimate Napoleon's genius or resilience. By June 1815, Napoleon had assembled a formidable army, loyal but smaller and less experienced than his previous forces. His strategy was bold. defeat the Allied armies individually before they could unite against him. Marching swiftly northward, Napoleon intended to attack British forces under the Duke of Wellington and the Prussian army under Marshal Blucher separately, preventing their combined strength. The critical battle occurred on June 18, 1815, near the small Belgian village of Waterloo. Napoleon's forces confronted Wellington's army, carefully positioned along a ridge, prepared defensively and awaiting French assault. Napoleon, supremely confident, believed victory would restore his empire and secure his legacy. He understood clearly the immense stakes involved. Waterloo would either reaffirm his brilliance or end his career decisively. Early in the morning, heavy rains soaked the battlefield, delaying Napoleon's attack and complicating French artillery movements. Nonetheless, Napoleon initiated the assault fiercely around midday. Throughout the afternoon, French infantry launched determined but costly attacks against British defensive positions. Both sides suffered heavy casualties, but Wellington's troops, disciplined and stubborn, held their ground tenaciously. As the brutal battle raged, Napoleon received disturbing news. Prussian forces under Blucher were rapidly approaching the battlefield, threatening to reinforce Wellington. Napoleon urgently ordered Marshal Grouchy, commanding another French force nearby, to intercept the advancing Prussians. Yet Grouchy's troops failed to stop Blucher's advance, setting the stage for a devastating turning point. Late in the afternoon, sensing time running out, Napoleon made a desperate gamble. He ordered an elite unit, the legendary Imperial Guard, to assault the British center directly, believing their renowned bravery and experience could shatter Wellington's lines decisively. As the Guard advanced courageously uphill under fierce fire, Wellington's soldiers rose suddenly from concealed positions, unleashing devastating volleys at close range. Napoleon's Guard wavered, then, unbelievably, retreated in disorder for the first time ever. The sight of Napoleon's Imperial Guard fleeing stunned his soldiers, rapidly spreading panic and demoralization. Simultaneously, Prussian troops under Blucher appeared dramatically, assaulting Napoleon's flank with overwhelming force. French resistance collapsed entirely, and what began as an orderly retreat quickly turned chaotic, marking a catastrophic defeat for Napoleon's forces. At Waterloo, Napoleon's ambition, brilliance, and courage met their final, irrevocable defeat. Within hours, his hopes for a restored empire vanished forever, leaving behind a battlefield strewn with thousands of casualties, a stark reminder of ambition's tragic cost. Napoleon, exhausted and devastated, withdrew swiftly toward Paris, realizing grimly that his reign was truly finished. Back in Paris, Napoleon's political support evaporated rapidly. His generals and ministers, recognizing reality, urged him to abdicate immediately, avoiding further bloodshed. On June 22, 1815, Napoleon abdicated for the second and final time, surrendering himself to British authorities shortly afterward. His brief, dramatic return from exile had ended disastrously at Waterloo, a battle synonymous ever after with final defeat. The British, determined never to risk another Napoleon resurgence, exiled him permanently to the remote Atlantic island of St. Helena, thousands of miles from Europe. There, Napoleon would spend the remainder of his life in isolation, reflecting bitterly on lost battles, squandered opportunities, and the staggering scale of his ambition. Yet even at Waterloo, Napoleon's dramatic story was not yet fully concluded. His remarkable legacy, heroic, tragic, complex, and controversial, would continue shaping Europe profoundly, long after his final exile began. In October 1815, Napoleon Bonaparte arrived on the remote Atlantic island of St. Helena, destined for permanent exile. The British had chosen this isolated location precisely because escape seemed impossible. Thousands of miles from Europe, surrounded by vast ocean, Napoleon, once Europe's most powerful and feared ruler, was reduced to confinement and isolation. Life on St. Helena was harsh, lonely, and monotonous. Napoleon lived in a modest residence at Longwood House, constantly under surveillance by British guards. Conditions were uncomfortable, the climate humid and oppressive. His health gradually deteriorated, compounded by sadness, boredom, and bitterness over lost glory. Yet despite these hardships, Napoleon's resilient spirit persisted. He spent long hours reflecting, dictating memoirs, and recounting his extraordinary life to companions who recorded his thoughts meticulously. Napoleon's final years were defined by introspection. Freed from political and military responsibilities, he contemplated his life openly, analyzing victories, defeats, choices, and mistakes. His reflections revealed a profound complexity, combining pride in his undeniable achievements with remorse over immense human costs. He acknowledged candidly that ambition had driven him relentlessly, leading both to greatness and ultimately disaster. Though physically isolated, Napoleon's influence remained vivid. Across Europe, his legend grew even as his physical presence faded. Romantic artists, writers, and intellectuals portrayed him as a tragic hero, bold, visionary, brilliant, yet ultimately flawed and human. Napoleon became a powerful symbol, to some, representing enlightened reform, courage, and vision, to others, ambition, oppression, and the dangers of absolute power. His complex legacy inspired fierce debate, shaping European politics, culture, and thought for generations. On St. Helena, Napoleon's health continued declining steadily. He suffered from persistent stomach pains, weakness, and fatigue, conditions exacerbated by isolation and melancholy. On May 5, 1821, at just 51 years old, Napoleon Bonaparte passed away quietly in his modest bedroom at Longwood House, surrounded by only a small group of companions. His last words, reportedly, "France, the army, the head of the army, Josephine," revealed lingering memories of past glory and personal affection. Yet Napoleon's death did not end his story. In death, he became larger than life, his legacy evolving profoundly. In 1840, his remains were returned dramatically to France amid national celebration, buried with immense ceremony at Les Invalides in Paris. His tomb became a powerful symbol of French national pride, visited by millions each year. Historically, Napoleon's impact remained unparalleled. His military genius reshaped warfare, introducing innovations in strategy, logistics, and organization still studied intensively today. Politically, his reforms in law, administration, education, and governance laid foundations for modern Europe, influencing countless nations far beyond France's borders. The Napoleonic Code, with its emphasis on clarity, equality, and secular governance, still profoundly shapes legal systems worldwide. Yet Napoleon's legacy was not without controversy. His relentless ambition and wars caused immense suffering, casualties, and devastation. His authoritarian rule suppressed freedoms, silenced dissent, and set dangerous precedents for future dictatorships. Napoleon embodied contradictions vividly: revolutionary yet authoritarian, enlightened yet ruthless, visionary yet deeply flawed. Today, Napoleon remains among history's most fascinating and divisive figures. His name evokes admiration and criticism, reverence and caution, inspiration and warning. Scholars, leaders, and citizens worldwide continue analyzing his life intensely, searching for lessons within his triumphs and failures. Ultimately, Napoleon's greatest legacy lies perhaps in his extraordinary complexity. His life exemplifies vividly humanity's boundless potential for brilliance and ambition, alongside profound vulnerabilities and moral complexities. Napoleon reminds humanity constantly of the delicate balance between greatness and hubris, vision and recklessness, leadership and tyranny. Napoleon Bonaparte lived remarkably, shaped history dramatically, and departed memorably. His incredible journey, from humble Corsican roots to supreme European power, remains eternally captivating, endlessly debated, and profoundly human. In the end, Napoleon's life, legacy, and legend endure powerfully, transcending time, culture, and nation, forever compelling humanity to reflect upon ambition, power, and the human condition itself.